Post-traumatic stress disorder is a brief overview and diagnostic criteria for PTSD. Post-traumatic stress disorder, also known as PTSD, is persistent, distorted cognitions about the cause or consequences of the traumatic events that led the individual to blame himself or herself or others. Persistent negative emotional states, fear, horror, anger, guilt, or shame. Markedly diminished interest and participation in significant activities. In the DSM-5, two sets of criteria are Criterion C, avoidance, and Criterion D, negative alterations in cognitions and mood. The requirement of a PTSD diagnosis includes at least one avoidance. What is a brief overview and diagnostic criteria for PTSD? Post-traumatic stress disorder, also known as PTSD, is persistent, distorted cognitions about the cause or consequences of the traumatic events that led the individual to blame himself, herself, or others. Persistent negative emotional state, example, fear, horror, anger, guilt, or shame. Markedly diminished interest and participation in significant activities. In the DSM-5, the two sets of criteria are Criterion C, avoidance, and Criterion D, negative alterations in cognitions and mood. The requirement of a PTSD diagnosis includes at least one avoidance. What are the symptoms of PTSD? How would you know if a client had anxiety? Post-traumatic stress disorder symptoms are generally grouped into four types: intrusive memories, avoidance, negative changes in thinking and mood, and changes in physical and emotional reactions. Symptoms can vary over time from person to person. People with PTSD have intense, disturbing thoughts and feelings related to their experience that last long after the traumatic event has ended. They may relive the event through flashbacks or nightmares. They may feel sadness, fear, anger, and they may feel detached and estranged from other people. The symptoms checklist for PTSD are emotional numbness, short-term memory problems, lack of memory related to the trauma, low self-confidence, self-blame, rumination, and sleep disturbances. What population is affected by PTSD? About 6% of the population will have PTSD at some point in their lives. Many people who have PTSD will recover and no longer meet diagnostic criteria for PTSD and treatment. This number includes any people who have PTSD in their life, even if symptoms go away. No specific information about race, gender, national origin, or sex was provided pertaining to PTSD. However, it is slightly more common in veterans than civilians. There are two sets of diagnostic criteria for PTSD. One applies to children aged 6 years and older, including adults. The criteria for younger children have a lower threshold for the diagnosis, consistent with the disorder. A child or teen may be diagnosed with PTSD if they have gone through a trauma and if their stress symptoms are severe and last long after the trauma is over. Theory is helpful in understanding this issue. Information processing theory has been widely used to understand the development and maintenance of anxiety disorders, including PTSD. This theory suggests that emotions such as fear are encoded in memory in the form of networks where representations of anxiety-provoking events are stored. Controversies that exist with this diagnosis historically or currently. Given the disorder's emphasis on combat-related trauma, there was concern the Vietnam War had politicized the decision, with its emphasis being on the hidden wounds of combat veterans. Because their dysfunction now was directly tied to military service and not to personality flaws, the Veterans Administration was required to offer services to affected soldiers. Furthermore, PTSD was recognized as a disorder that merited disability status. Consequently, the Veterans Administration requested more government funding to meet the increased need for psychological services. Some of the top treatments for PTSD. Medication, antidepressants such as sertraline, paroxetine, bupropion. Therapy, cognitive behavior therapy to change the thought process, exposure therapy, which is reliving the traumatic incident, psychodynamic therapy, which involves handling personal values in emotional conflict, and eye movement desensitization and reprocessing, changing the series of eye movement. Self-care, getting timely help and treatment, following your treatment plan and taking your medication as prescribed. Nutrition, a healthy, nutritious diet with fresh fruits and vegetables is recommended, and a specialist to consult, a psychologist who specializes in diagnosing and treating diseases of the brain, emotional disturbance, and behavior problems, and a psychiatrist who specializes in the branch of medicine concerned with the diagnosis and treatment of mental illness. The list of the sources cited.